It's one thing to have, like, a piece of paper telling you exactly who was invited to a massive party.
Right.
It's another thing entirely to walk into the venue and actually see who showed up.
Yeah.
Like, are they interacting, or is the room just practically empty?
Exactly. Yeah. Are
Yeah.
people actually on the dance floor?
Right. Because for decades, when scientists or policymakers and even corporations talked about the health of our planet, they were essentially just reading off a guest list.
Yeah. They were just tracking species presence.
Like, are the tigers still in this forest? Are the frogs still in this swamp? And if the answer is yes, then I guess the ecosystem is fine.
Which is a huge assumption.
It is, because they were entirely missing the reality of how full the room actually was. So today we're taking a deep dive into the Biodiversity Intactness Index, or the BII.
Yeah. It's a metric that basically throws away the guest list and measures the actual volume of the party instead.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to be clear to you, the listener. We aren't just talking about some niche scientific tool here.
Not at all.
Our mission today is to take this incredibly dense, global-scale ecological data and translate it, because this specific index is actively forcing multinational corporations to, like, redraw their supply chain.
Right. It's dictating how central banks view financial risk.
Exactly. And ultimately, it influences the resilience of the systems that produce your food and filter your water.
Okay.
So let's start with the baseline. What actually separates the BII from the way we used to measure nature?
Well, the fundamental difference is the shift from measuring presence to measuring abundance.
Okay.
So the BII provides a single, scientifically grounded percentage. And that number expresses how much of a region's original biodiversity remains compared to an undisturbed pre-human baseline.
So we're treating that pristine historical state as 100%.
Exactly. So instead of just asking if, a specific type of pollinating bee went extinct in a region, the BII asks if there are still enough of those bees actually doing their jobs in the ecosystem.
Right, compared to before we altered the landscape.
Yeah. It assigns weight to each species based on its expected population size in that intact reference state.
So if traditional species richness is just checking off that guest list to see who showed up, the BII is noticing if the dance floor is packed with those guests.
Right.
Or if there's just like one lonely guy standing in the corner trying to keep the vibe alive. It's measuring the actual population density and the functional volume.
I mean, that paints the picture perfectly. And the data reveals that our planetary dance floor is emptying out much, much faster than the old guest list metric suggested.
Which is terrifying.
It is. What's fascinating here is how this metric fits into the framework of planetary boundaries.
Oh, right.
These are the 9 scientifically proposed thresholds within which human civilization can safely operate. Things like climate change, ocean acidification, and biosphere integrity.
Okay.
For biosphere integrity, the safe operating space is considered to be a BII of 90% or above. You need that ecosystem dance floor to be at least 90% full to maintain the complex interactions that keep the environment stable.
And I imagine we aren't sitting at 90%.
No. Current global estimates put the mean BII at roughly 79 to 81%.
Wow. So humanity is officially operating in a transgressed, high-risk zone globally.
Yeah, we are well outside the safe boundary. The safety net of our ecological systems has been, fundamentally compromised.
But, I mean, I'm stuck on the logistics here, though. Hearing a global average of 79% immediately makes me question the math.
How so?
Because someone had to actually measure the entire planet to arrive at that single number, which just sounds statistically impossible. Like, we can't put a biologist in every single square kilometer of the Earth to count beetles and birds.
No, we definitely can't.
So how does this methodology actually work under the hood?
It requires an incredibly clever integration of field biology and satellite technology. The biological foundation of the BII is something called the PREDIX-S database.
PREDIX?
Yeah, it stands for Projecting Responses of Ecological Diversity in Changing Terrestrial Systems. And as of the latest compilations, this database holds over 3.9 million individual records.
3.9 million. That's a lot of bugs.
It is. It comes from more than 32,000 sampling sites across the globe, covering roughly 50,000 different species.
Okay, but even with almost 4 million records,
Mhm.
that's still just a tiny fraction of the Earth's surface.
True, which is where the statistical modeling comes in. Scientists take those field sites, say a specific patch of logged forest in Brazil, where they know exactly how much the beetle population dropped.
Right.
And they cross-reference that biological data with a data set called land use harmonization, or LUH2.
LUH2.
Yeah, LUH2 is essentially a high-resolution time machine for the Earth's surface. It categorizes how every single square kilometer of the planet is being used by humans.
Oh, I see.
It tracks historical changes from primary vegetation to, pasture or cropland or urban sprawl.
So they figure out the mathematical relationship at the sites they actually have measured, and then they apply that formula to similar satellite pixels globally.
Precisely.
Like if cutting down a forest in one region drops the insect abundance by 40%, they just map that 40% penalty onto every other pixel that the satellite data shows was recently deforested.
That is the core mechanism. And when you run that model, the scores vary wildly depending on the land use.
I would assume so.
Yeah, primary vegetation with minimal human disturbance sits at that baseline of 100%. But once you introduce agriculture, the numbers plummet.
Because you're clearing everything out.
Exactly. Croplands, particularly intensive monocultures that rely on annual harvesting and heavy pesticide use, they drop to anywhere between 25 and 50% BII.
Wow.
Because you've replaced a complex web of life with a single plant species. And urban areas like our cities and built environments, they fall to an average of 20 to 40%.
Well, yeah, because you are dealing with a near-complete replacement of native habitat with concrete and asphalt.
Right. There has to be a margin of error here, though. I mean, if we are extrapolating from known biological sites to the rest of the map, the model is really only as good as the underlying field data.
Oh, absolutely. That is a critical vulnerability in the methodology. There is an inherent bias in the PredictS database.
Like what?
Well, it is heavily weighted toward well-studied taxonomic groups. We have brilliant, robust data on beetles, vascular plants, and birds.
Things people like to look at.
Exactly. But we have massive, glaring blind spots for soil invertebrates and fungi, which are the foundational engines of any ecosystem.
Right.
And geographically, the field data is also heavily skewed toward sites in Europe and North America. So the model is projecting global health based on the species and the regions we know best.
Which means in places like the deep tropics, where biodiversity is the highest, but field sampling is sparse, our confidence intervals just widen significantly.
Yeah. So what does this all mean for us? Let's ground this in a practical reality for a second. Say I live in one of those dense urban areas you mentioned, like a city sitting at a bleak 20% BII. But I decide I want to manually fix my little square of the map. I go out to my apartment balcony, I bring in tons of rich soil, and I plant like 50 different types of beautiful exotic flowers.
Right.
I add bamboo, a water feature, maybe some imported ivy. It's incredibly lush and full of life. Does my urban BII score suddenly shoot up to 100% because I created all this new biological density?
No, it wouldn't move the needle at all.
Wait, really? Not at all?
Not even a little bit. Your balcony garden might be beautiful, but the entire BII calculation is anchored to the original undisturbed reference state.
Ah.
It's comparing what is there now strictly to what naturally existed there before human intervention.
Because my imported bamboo and exotic flowers weren't part of the original historical ecosystem.
Exactly. Introducing non-native plants, no matter how abundant or lush they grow, doesn't repair the intactness of the original community.
That makes sense.
The metric doesn't reward you for just adding random green things to a landscape. It measures the preservation and functional abundance of the right green things,
The ones that evolved to interact together over millennia.
Right. If an introduced species thrives and becomes hyperabundant, it actually throws the ecosystem out of balance, which the BII recognizes as degradation, not improvement.
So you can't just hack the system with a trip to the local garden center.
No, you really can't.
And that limitation brings us directly to the entities that are altering these landscapes on a massive global scale, multinational corporations.
Right.
Because for the longest time, a company's impact on biodiversity was just treated as an environmental externality. It was a PR problem, like something you just put on page 40 of an annual sustainability report.
Yeah, a nice to have, not a must have.
But the data shows this is actually transitioning into a boardroom panic. Why is a metric about beetles and original reference states suddenly dictating corporate finance?
It really comes down to a fundamental rewrite of how global markets define and disclose financial risk. And this is being driven by new international frameworks.
Like what?
Well, we're seeing the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which governments adopted to mandate the restoration of 30% of all degraded ecosystems by 2030.
30% is huge.
It is. But the real teeth come from the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures.
Which, I mean, sounds like dry regulatory jargon, but from a corporate perspective, it's essentially a legal mandate to open the books on your environmental footprint.
Exactly. It functions very similarly to how companies now have to disclose their climate and carbon risks. The TNFD provides a framework that forces organizations to audit, disclose, and financially manage their dependencies on nature.
And the BII is a recommended core metric for these audits.
Yes. Regulators are recognizing that biodiversity is not some soft moral issue. It is a material financial vulnerability.
Which brings up that crazy study you mentioned from the source.
Oh, yeah. Researchers at the Dutch Central Bank conducted a comprehensive study of their own financial sector. They mapped the investment portfolios of Dutch banks, pension funds, and insurers against the ecosystem services those investments rely on.
Okay.
And they found that Dutch financial institutions alone have 510 billion euros of assets that are highly or very highly dependent on functioning ecosystems.
510 billion euros.
Yeah.
Just in the Netherlands.
Just the Netherlands.
That fundamentally changes the risk profile of those assets. I mean, think about it. If a bank issues a $1 billion loan to a massive agricultural conglomerate,
Right.
and that conglomerate operates in a region where the BII has collapsed, the pollinators disappear, the soil loses its ability to retain water, and the crop yields just crash.
And when the yields crash, the conglomerate defaults on the loan, and the central bank is left holding the bag. If we connect this to the bigger picture, a low BII score means you have eroded the ecological redundancy of a landscape.
Redundancy meaning like a backup system.
Exactly. Redundancy is nature's insurance policy. In a high BII environment, if one species of pollinator suffers a disease outbreak, there are 5 other native species ready to pick up the slack.
But when your BII drops to 30%, you stripped away that buffer.
Yes. You are one drought, one pest, or one heavy rainfall away from total systemic failure.
And if you're listening to this right now thinking it's just a problem for European investment bankers, I mean, it's really not.
No, it affects everyone.
This mechanism directly impacts the stability of your daily life. If the agricultural regions supplying your local grocery store lose their ecological redundancy, the resulting crop failures drive up the price of your food.
Yep.
Your local water utility relies on the intact root systems of native forests to filter runoff. If that BII drops, your utility has to build multi-million-dollar filtration plants, and your water bill skyrockets.
And don't forget your investments.
Exactly. If your retirement fund is heavily invested in companies that aren't tracking these risks, your life savings are sitting on a hidden ecological fault line.
And the regulatory walls are closing in on companies that ignore this. Take the new EU deforestation regulation.
Oh, right.
If a company's upstream supply chain is found to be driving land use conversion in areas that previously had a high BII, they won't just pay a fine. They could be legally locked out of selling their products in the European market entirely.
Wow.
So the physical risk of crop failure is now paired with the transition risk of being regulated out of existence.
When you realize a single supply chain disruption or a regulatory ban can cost billions, you really start seeing why companies are panic mapping their assets.
Yeah, they have to.
We need to look at what this actually looks like in practice.
Yeah.
How are organizations actively utilizing the BII to alter their physical operations on the ground?
Well, the application of this data is becoming incredibly sophisticated. Let's look at agriculture. A large European food and beverage company that relies heavily on palm oil realized they had a massive blind spot.
Okay.
They didn't just ask their suppliers for some vague sustainability pledge. They actually ran a comprehensive BII screening of their entire global network.
Wow.
They took the exact GPS coordinates of their suppliers' plantations and overlaid them onto a high-resolution 1-kilometer BII map to track historical trends.
So they basically mapped their money directly against the biological health of the specific land they were exploiting?
Yes, and the results forced immediate action. They discovered that 23% of their total palm oil volume was originating from specific regions where the BII had plummeted by more than 15 percentage points in just the previous decade.
15 points in 10 years.
Yeah, a drop of 15 points in 10 years is a rapid, catastrophic ecological collapse. It signaled massive deforestation and a highly volatile supply chain.
So they are sourcing nearly a quarter of their core ingredient from an ecosystem that is actively dying. How did they course correct?
They used this localized spatial data as leverage. They made measurable BII improvements a strict, non-negotiable condition for renewing contracts with 4 of their largest
Oh,
suppliers.
wow.
And for the remaining high-risk volume, they immediately pulled their contracts and shifted to certified sustainable sources in higher BII regions.
That's a huge move.
By actively managing their procurement through the lens of this index, 2 years later, the weighted average BII of their entire supply base had improved by 9 percentage points. They weaponized the data to de-risk their operations.
Here's where it gets really interesting, to me at least. BII is basically becoming an ecological credit score for the planet.
Oh, I like that analogy.
The lower the score of the land you're operating on, the higher the risk and the heavier the regulatory penalty. And there's a brilliant example of this in the infrastructure sector.
Right, the train.
Yeah. A national rail authority was planning a new 180-kilometer high-speed rail corridor. Historically, infrastructure projects just draw the most direct line on a map and bulldoze whatever's in the way.
But under new statutory frameworks, that authority now has biodiversity net gain obligation.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning, if they destroy a high-value, intact habitat, they are legally required to pay an exorbitant amount of money to offset that destruction by restoring land elsewhere. The financial penalty for bulldozing pristine nature has actually been priced into the market.
So to avoid bankrupting the project with offset fees, they ran site-level BII modeling before they even finalized the train road.
Yeah.
And they discovered that their planned path went straight through a semi-natural grassland with a BII of 84%.
Which is huge, because in a developed region, finding a grassland with an 84% intactness is incredibly rare. It's a pristine pocket of original ecology, which is particularly critical right now, because while we constantly hear about the destruction of tropical rainforests, temperate grasslands and savannas are actually the most threatened biomes on Earth.
Wait, really? More than rainforests?
Yeah. Globally, their BII has been driven down to an average of 55 to 68%, primarily because they are so easily converted into flat, profitable cropland.
So driving a high-speed train through an 84% intact grassland would trigger a massive environmental interest rate in the form of offset penalties.
Exactly.
And to avoid that, the rail authority completely rerouted the corridor to bypass the grassland. And instead, they focused their required mitigation efforts on restoring adjacent, heavily degraded land that had a much lower score.
The metric actively saved a critical biome from being paved over.
That's incredible.
It really is. It forces the market to assign a tangible, prohibitive cost to the destruction of intact nature. And it's not just corporate risk management either. This data is empowering conservationists to hold people accountable.
Like the Mediterranean group.
Yeah. An NGO used BII spatial modeling, combined with open-source citizen science records from apps like iNaturalist, to investigate the rapid degradation of coastal seagrass beds.
Which is super important because seagrass is a massive carbon sink and a foundational nursery for marine ecosystems. It's basically vital infrastructure for the ocean.
Right, so the NGO gathered enough data to prove that these specific seagrass beds still held an intactness value between 78 and 85%.
High scores.
Very high. But they also proved that commercial boat anchors and rampant coastal development were actively tearing those beds apart, driving the score down year over year.
So they had receipts.
Exactly. Because they could present regulators with hard, quantifiable proof of both the high baseline value and the downward trajectory, they successfully lobbied the government to expand a national marine park and legally ban anchoring in those bays.
Going from vague complaints about environmental damage to pointing at a specific universally recognized number fundamentally shifts the power dynamic.
It changes the whole conversation.
But, I mean, relying on citizen scientists snapping photos on their phones or waiting years for biologists to manually count beetles for the PretextMS database, that feels incredibly slow.
It's slow.
If a supply chain is collapsing today, a CEO can't wait 5 years for an updated map to figure out what to do.
No, they can't. The lag time in the data has always been the bottleneck. But the way we monitor this is currently undergoing a technological revolution. We are rapidly moving toward near real-time BII monitoring.
How?
By replacing manual field surveys with environmental DNA or eDNA.
Oh, this is where you essentially take like a scoop of river water or a vial of soil and analyze the genetic material left behind by whatever organisms recently passed through it.
It's a total game changer. Animals shed skin cells, mucus, and waste continuously. By
Mm.
sequencing the DNA in a single water sample, scientists can detect the presence and increasingly the relative abundance of hundreds of species simultaneously.
Without ever actually seeing the animals.
Exactly. And when you combine this rapid, localized metabolic footprint with advanced satellite imagery that uses machine learning to assess vegetation structure, you eliminate the years of manual data processing.
So you generate a live feed of ecosystem health,
Yeah.
going from a 5-year delay to a monthly or even weekly high-definition dashboard of the Earth's biological intactness. That completely removes the corporate excuse of, oh, we didn't know our supply chain was destroying this region.
It makes the invisible degradation visible in real time.
Wow. So to pull all these threads together for you listening, we started by understanding that the BII isn't just about noting which species exist. It measures the actual functional volume of an ecosystem against a 100% pre-human baseline.
Right.
We confronted the reality that humanity is operating at a globally transgressed boundary of roughly 79%.
Which is dangerous territory.
Very.
Mm.
And we explored how new financial frameworks are utilizing this metric to panic-map corporate assets, reroute multi-billion-dollar infrastructure, and fundamentally reshape how risk is calculated on this planet.
It represents a profound maturation in how human systems interact with biological reality. But this raises an important question, one that challenges the very foundation of how we define intactness as we look to the future. Expanding the BII from terrestrial land into marine and freshwater systems has proven incredibly difficult for a very specific reason.
Because aquatic organisms are highly mobile.
Exactly. The core concept of a spatially fixed reference state declaring that this specific kilometer of ocean should have exactly these historical fish is deeply complicated when the ecosystem itself naturally shifts with ocean currents and temperature changes.
Right. I mean, you can't penalize a patch of ocean for losing a species if that species naturally migrated to a warmer current 100 miles away.
Right. Now, apply that aquatic logic to the land. As the impacts of climate change accelerate, terrestrial species and eventually entire biomes will be forced to migrate just to survive.
Oh, wow.
Forests will shift toward the poles, alpine plants will move higher up mountainsides to escape the heat.
I see where this is going, and it kind of breaks the entire model.
It really does. If our gold standard for intact biodiversity relies on ecosystems staying perfectly still within a fixed 1-kilometer grid, how will the BII adapt when nature is forced to move?
Yeah, if a native forest slowly migrates north over the next 50 years, does its original historical location receive a 0% BII?
And does the new location get penalized because it is suddenly full of species that weren't historically there?
That's a huge problem. Does the very definition of pristine have to change when the climate forces the entire biological world into motion?
That is the big unknown right now.
That is a profound paradox for you to ponder. If we return to our party analogy, what happens to the metric if the building catches fire and the entire gathering has to relocate down the street to survive?
You can't accurately judge the health of the party by staring at the empty, burning room they left behind.
Right. The metric has to figure out how to follow the life, which means the baseline of what is natural is about to become a moving target.
It's a massive challenge for the scientific community.
And it's a reminder for all of us that the natural world is not a static museum exhibit. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll catch you next time.